As businesses continue to adopt AI in all forms, we need to think about how these interact with our businesses in a responsible way. The rise of generative AI, keeping AI secure, trustworthy, and efficient has become more critical than ever. This is where CalypsoAI steps in. Today, I'm joined by James White, CTO from CalypsoAI, to explore how they're pioneering the AI security space, enabling businesses to harness the power of AI responsibly without fear of data leaks, hallucinations, or inefficiencies in the AI development pipeline. Stay tuned to hear why CalypsoAI is shaping the future of safe, efficient AI in the enterprise. This is episode 90 of Great Things with Great Tech with James White from CalypsoAI. Hey, Jimmy, thanks for being on episode 90 of Great Things with Great Tech. I can't believe I'm in the 90s, but here we are, and what better way to count us down to 100 than talking about Calypso AI. So, Jimmy, tell us a little bit about Calypso AI, what the company does, and what it was founded for.
Excellent. Absolutely. And thanks for having me on, Anthony. A pleasure to be the 90th guest and one of my favorite decades. So I guess Calypso AI founded way back when, over 5 years ago, to look at because it sounds funny now, but look at the threat of how AI usage and adoption would create new ways for adversarial attackers to target systems, target institutions, target regular users. And back then, it was, if you remember, it was all machine learning, no
Mhm.
generative AI, no transformer architectures, etc. So when we started, it was a company that was not really required by enterprise, if I'm being honest. It
Yep.
was mainly a problem for big nations, for defense primarily. And so at that stage, that was indeed where we started working for the Department of Defense and the US government and tackling really gnarly problems in the machine learning space and things like adversarial attacks of that nature.
That's interesting, right? And you make a point because you're right. In 2018, no one, if they're honest, was talking about generative AI. People knew about AI in general, ML, and it was always a thing. But yeah, so it's kind of almost like this whole, fast forwarding now to 2024, it's all kind of just, their fear. And it's kind of like, oh, here we go. We've actually got meaning, right? But when we talk about responsible adoption of AI at scale, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, so it means, first of all, it means different things to different people. And so the definition of responsible is sometimes mandated. So if you work in a highly regulated industry, it is well defined and it has clear boundaries. If you work in an industry that is not well regulated, there are upcoming regulations, the EU AI Act, and will start having teeth very, very early next year. State by state in the US, even, each other region has different levels of fidelity around what they want to protect and mandate in terms of safe or ethical AI usage. And so, company to company, it really matters to understand what your responsibilities are, what you need to do to just use AI versus train AI models versus use it for what type of processes, making decisions, financial calls, etc.
Hmm.
And so that all sounds really scary, but effectively the most important thing to do is to grab the nettle and effectively say, if we're going to embrace AI, embrace the future, we need to understand what we should do and how we should safely adopt this technology.
Yeah, that's like kind of big thinking stuff, right? Like it's even today on the news here in Australia, there was an announcement about the government putting in some sort of mandate guidelines as to the use of AI across the board, right? And I believe
Mm,
if, even in the states, the AI Protection or Future Act was passed on the 31st of July. Just basically to how the US can stay ahead of the game in AI. So it's typically there and thereabouts. And from experience of this technology as we've gone through, you mentioned the 90s. Great, love the 90s as well, by the way. How good was that? Um, it's, technology has moved really quickly, but at every step, like you think of the internet, people were afraid of the internet. People didn't know how to
mm.
use it properly to start with. And then obviously it became a bit more mainstream, but then guidelines had to put in play. You think about every little step that we've gone along the way. I mean, even in crypto when that happened. I mean, that's a bit of a different story because of the way that it has panned out. But that was also that last, oh, holy crap, what is this? We're scared of this. We got to mandate
Yep.
it. AI is definitely here to stay without question. And so this level of now, okay, it's here. How do we control it and mandate it is huge. Before we get into a little bit more about Calypso, it would be remiss of me to ask about yourself. And you're in Ireland at the moment. How did you get to be in this space and come? Were you a founder of the company, or did you come in after the founding of the company?
Yes, so I was working for a company called Qualtrics, and we had just been acquired by SAP. And I got a phone call from a recruiter that I trusted, and said, "Look, you gotta look at this company." And I was not a founder,
Mhm.
but when I joined, there was no code, there was no engineers, there was no product, and so you may ask, why the hell did you leave your job in Qualtrics and move to this really really early stage startup? So I moved when we were pre Series A, and the only reason I moved is that when I paired my love for cybersecurity with something I'd studied last in college. It'd been a long time since I looked at AI. It was swarm intelligence back then was the
Wow.
soup du
Yeah.
jour. And then I said, okay, wow, this is making a comeback, and it might be for real this time, like for real,
Mhm.
for real. And then when I saw that, of course, with adoption, there will be a huge net new attack surface, it's something that I thought would be super, super interesting. And so that was my reason for joining Eclipse AI. We've taken a huge amount of changes since then. It's very much a different company now. We're now completely in the enterprise space,
Mhm.
and so for me, I think it has happened. The thing we were waiting for, we were all dressed up waiting for the door to ring to bring us to the dance, and we're now here. And it's as expected. It's wild. It's exciting, and people talk about the gold rush in technology a lot of the time, where everyone's just rushing towards a random mountain and starting to throw a pickaxe into rock. I feel like that stage is beginning to end, and we're seeing
Mhm.
real utilization of AI and huge investment in the space, and the ROI is starting to be achieved now.
That's interesting. Yeah, for sure. And so what you're saying is you're a little bit lucky, but you got there and it's taken fruit.
Yeah,
No, no, no. Yeah.
I got on the other boat than the Titanic, I guess is the way I would describe it.
That's awesome. But in terms of, so you mentioned your background in cybersecurity was, so that was your background. So you were in that space. Was that what you were always doing, or did you start off like most of us doing maybe networking? Like what I'm just interested in the career progression.
Yeah, so I started off in the most exciting technology area in the world, legislation. That was my first job. I worked for a startup working in legislation, uh, replacing mainframes with what now sounds funny, but Java enterprise solutions.
Hmm.
And so I moved from that startup into it was called Propylon, into a company called Dun& Bradstreet, one of the oldest companies in the world. And I worked there for a number of years before I jumped into cybersecurity. I was the first engineer outside of the US for Mandiant. And so I worked for Mandiant for a number of years. We were acquired by FireEye, which I now believe is called Trellix. It's just the weird nature of
Okay.
software.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Qualtrics, and then into back to cybersecurity. So that was my favorite. I joined Manny just as the New York Times was hacked by APT1, that cyber group, and so it was the most exciting time to be in cyber. And so the roller coaster during that period was something I was keen to get back to, and I believe AI is a much bigger, faster roller coaster.
Yeah, and I guess what you've done here is you're taking both the love of and the professionalism of your career in terms of cyber and that development mixed with the future of AI, and your skill set is now lending itself beautifully to this world of AI and how you actually protect companies from doing damage with the technology or the technology doing damage to them.
Yeah, I think when people look at AI from a business perspective, they rightly look at the benefit to the company. Like, what's the efficiency we can make, or the new product we can launch, or the extra profit margins we can deliver, and they look at AI from that perspective. I look at protecting that investment. So I look at, how do you do that, but what are the things you need to put in place so you can realize that benefit? And working in Mandiant, all we saw all day were the black hats, the threat activists, etc., um, figuring out loopholes, ways into systems, how to traverse a network, how to break into an endpoint, how to exfil information. And so when you see that all day, every day, you start developing a mindset of, okay, when you look at a solution, you find problems. And that behooves us very well in Calypso AI to look at somebody's program, how they're planning on rolling out AI, and where the Achilles heel of that approach may be, and then how best to protect against that.
Makes sense. Yeah, yeah. And I guess what you're saying there in terms of efficiency, it works both ways, right? Because yeah, companies are looking for efficiencies in AI, but then also the attackers and the attack vectors are also becoming more and more targeted, more efficient as well. You know, so it's kind of like you're fighting a war with everyone's just getting ahead, and then someone else jumps ahead, and then you've always got to be sort of cognizant of the other side being better than you because they're using the same tool set effectively as to what you're using.
Yeah, people, always refer to that as the cat and mouse game. I like to call it the Tom and Jerry game because every episode of Tom and Jerry, still to this day, I love it. And usually the cat, Tom, gets his way at the start, and then Jerry comes back
That's
and
it.
wins the day. So we see ourselves as the Jerry in Tom and Jerry. And when these attacks come in, we figure out one, what damages caused, how did the attack happen, and then we treat that as a 0 day, just like regular cybersecurity, and then we create solutions to defend against it. And the iteration time loop to get that done is the real challenge. And so, how do you leverage AI to battle against black hats or threat actors using AI? And that's the real secret sauce into how to combat this new domain, this new discipline.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're kind of going ahead a little bit, but I think it's actually just an interesting continuation of that. Are a lot of your customers net new? I think about backup and where I play in the space, and we talk about certain areas of backup like a replication or offsite disaster recovery, and more often than not, customers don't know they need it until something bad happens. And they realize, actually, I could have done with having part of my data offsite, right? Is this the same thing that you guys are seeing today where this sort of service is only being brought in for the majority at the moment when something bad has happened? Or is it a 50-50 thing with your customers?
That's actually a really interesting question because if I'm being fully transparent, initially our customers were folks who had been maybe burnt a little bit, and so
Mhm.
they wanted to figure out how to reapproach the problem before they went at scale. Now I think there's enough publicity and content out there through people like yourselves and folks who get the message out there that it's a great technology, but there are risks and you have to protect yourself against those risks. We see people taking a proactive stance, and they typically go to a POC, a proof of concept internally, where there's very, very little risk. And then if that works successfully for them with the data sets they're using, with the use case they're using, then they'll say pause. Now we need to understand how we go to production. And they're treating that as a stage gate before they actually go full bore. And when they do that, they typically, get on Google and they look for companies that do that.
Mhm.
And so there is a proactive nature out there, which is now fantastic to see because
Yeah.
it represents a maturity step in the industry.
I was going to say that that's maturity in terms of where we are in the hype cycle of this particular technology, right? People know that they need it. It's being pushed by all the major players, and everyone knows about it. And everyone's trying to develop a response to it in some way. Okay, so with that, if I'm a CEO and I come to you guys, I know that we're doing something around AI. I know that we've got some data that we want to expose. I know that our guys are saying, well, we've got to use this thing called an LLM. I don't know what that is, but it's an LLM.
Yeah.
So what does Calypso do at that point to come in and help that enterprise?
Strangely enough, we first challenge that you need us, right? So, are you really adopting AI or using AI for the right reasons, or using AI for the sake of using AI? And so typically what you'll see is a company wants to dip their toe in the water. They'll do something quote unquote safe. And that would look like a low-hanging fruit project, like a chat bot or an FAQ bot, etc.
Mhm.
And so we say, look, let's not, be chicken little here, and let's not say everything could be terrible, but let's focus on what could actually be damaging from a simple use case like that. And with those simple, quote unquote, not dangerous use cases, you can actually have significant brand damage. And sadly, we've seen that in the media where we've had a lot of companies now bring in a chatbot, and the chatbot will say nefarious things about the company, or it will be induced to do things it shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And so that's where we start. We look at the use case they're focused on, and we say, how do we wrap that around? And typically, with any AI use case, and you've already hit on this, you will have a combination of two things. You will have one or many applications talking to one or many LLMs or SLMs or any type of generative AI model. And with that, that's usually what represents the prototype. When you move then from prototype to production, you need to put policy management in between those two. So what can the application ask the model? What data can it send? And then what content should it protect the application from receiving?
Okay.
So you don't want abusive content coming back. You don't want content that's derogatory to a gender, a race, a religion, a company. So there's bidirectional protections required there. And then if you zoom out one click, you will see also that you need to have access control, log management, all the typical things that exist in InfoSec today.
Yeah.
And not to derail the conversation, but that's an interesting migration we're seeing now where people are treating AI as a regular software development project with some extras attached. And that's the kind of next step to maturity we've witnessed.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because the framework's all the same. And I think, I look at it from the other side as well. When we talk, because we're getting asked about how do you back up and all the
Yeah.
AI stuff, the model. And we're like, well, we don't know. We haven't actually got like backup for AI as it stands. But when you break it down, everything is a component that can be looked at in a sense, right? So you've got your vector database, you've got your storage, you've got the actual model there, you've got the compute, you've got all separate parts that can make up this whole platform. So to your point, you know, it's no different really to any other sort of application that we're doing. I think the inputs and the outputs are a little bit more critical is what is the way that I said. To your point, you know, having a model create a response that is dangerous, risky, or puts people, in harm's way. That's not great. So I think that's what you guys are fundamentally trying to achieve here, right? You're trying to make sure that when companies go in and they start to look at how they can implement this to get the efficiency out of their data, they're doing it in the safest way. And I believe you can do it you do it in two ways. You do it inline and post. You just want to explain how you plug yourselves into the process
Yeah.
as well.
So that you nailed it. So inline, we sit between you and the model. And so in our platform, you can define as many models you wish, public, private, open, closed, and you can all configure them inside. You then get to decide which applications have access to which models. And so your application, instead of talking directly with a model, will talk with our API. And our
Mhm.
API will behave just like a normal GenAI model AI, or sorry, API, I should say. And with that API, effectively what you're doing is you're giving the application developer, the user, the ability to not have to worry. They just focus on their job. They focus on getting the functionality or features they need from the model. And then the policies that you define in our platform sit in between. And so you can decide for this use case, we want these policies. For this other use case, we don't want this, we do want that. We want it bi-directional scanning one way or two way. And so that's the main kind of normal use case that people have. But with like any technology, if you give someone a hammer, they can hit a nail or they can break a window, right?
Yeah.
Folks have been using our technology in ways that we hadn't predicted, and it is fun to witness this. It's like everything with AI, it's developing legs and going in new directions.
Yeah.
But a lot of our customers are now using our scanners, our scan API to scan all sorts of things, not necessarily AI content. And so we've one customer scanning for arbitrary code execution in their source code, right? And so why do they do that? Because AI is awesome at detecting that stuff. And
Mhm.
so because we use AI in our platform, it's a security tuned AI model that we have internally, its own proprietary technology
Okay.
that will allow you to easily detect that stuff. So it's exciting to see what people use it for.
Yeah. So as an example, so at the moment, like I'm doing a bit of tinkering. I'm a horrible coder, but I love to tinker. So at the moment, I've got like a little proof of concept where I've got code. It's a bit of Python. It's basically talking to an LLM. but then I'm getting the LLM to create a bit of SQL query to go into a database and pick something up. So on the fly, it's creating a select, bam, bam, and then, but that's based on the prompt. The prompt is going, give me this. It
Yeah.
goes to LLM. The LLM then goes, okay, I'll create what I think, again, generate the code. And then that's what gets executed, right? So you're kind of putting all your trust into the LLM to do the right select query, right? Now, obviously, that's just a select, it's a read only mechanism. But I thought to myself, this is a really good example of something that could go really wrong because
Yeah.
can someone just go, hey, delete this, this, and that, create a query that deletes this, and the LLM will just do it because it knows no better. It knows no better, right? So that as an example, your platform sits in between there to make sure that something like that can't happen based on the policies that you guys have got as part of your IP.
Exactly right. So in that use case, you may have, let's say it was a write SQL statement. You would have we allow you to write a description. So you could say something like block SQL injection, right? And you would have it only on the inbounds, only coming back from the model. So when you ask that question to your GenAI model, it will respond. And if the code snippet that comes back contains code that is liable or vulnerable to SQL injection, it will block it. And it will tell you it was blocked because it contained code that was liable to SQL injection.
Yeah.
Um, but we have this funny kind of conversation internally, which is the fallacy rules, right? So we call them the fallacy rules because with AI, there are a bunch of fallacies that people. And one of them is the low hanging fruit when we spoke about already. There's no danger. It's a chat bot. It can't cause us any harm. The other one is, you spoke about the SQL, the select statement. So we have seen an example where and I won't comment on any of the details, but effectively somebody asked for SQL code to do something, to check records, and they gave the information with the schema of their database. And the SQL that came back said select all from logs. Okay. And so they were like, great, it's read only, copy, paste, execute. And that table was hundreds of millions of records long because it was a logs table.
Mm.
And it caused a DB lock on the connection
Okay.
pool. And
Yeah.
they thought that, okay, this is must went wrong. It's crashed. I'll try a second instance. And now what they're causing is two back to back, unbelievably long. And I believe it wasn't an index table because it was just logs. It was like a data
Yeah.
store, kind of dev null almost. So we're seeing that the use of AI, even just for chat, give your enterprise chat capabilities. When people don't understand the subject matter that they're interacting with, they're liable to just trust it. And we don't
Hmm.
know where this has come from psychologically, but it's really present. It's fascinating.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, like and I think I've talked about. I had a couple of AI conversations on this podcast over the last couple of years, obviously, and the trust aspect is something that always pops up. Like the hardest part for me is to trust it, but I do, right?
Yeah.
And I think to myself I shouldn't. Like when I'm asking it to do certain things or write me this, and I'm finding myself just not checking, just implicitly going, okay, it's told me that when I know that there's all sorts of hallucinations that go on, and you only have to look a little bit to go, like even today with the show notes, for this, I do obviously use, I'm efficient. I want to be efficient. So I do pump in the last episode show notes and then I put in all the research and it kind of brings up the new show notes. And it had your old platform that you said was decommissioned, right? But
Yeah.
to me,
Vesper.
great example, right? But to me, I was like, I was going to ask about Vesper, and if I hadn't queried you about it, it would have been an awkward question to ask because you all know that and it would have shown me to be a really bad researcher, right? But it wasn't that I'm a bad researcher; it's just that I trusted the AI to give me the right freaking question, and it didn't. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that. What do you think about that? Like, where's your theory on why we? Is it because we've been told that AI for years is all about robots and humanity and the future, and it's a sure thing, and we're at this sure thing now. So I think in our my perception of it is that in our heads, we trust it because we've been told it's coming.
I have two beliefs on this, and one of them we speak about a lot, of course, daily in work, and we have conversations with our customers about it as well. because understanding different viewpoints helps us understand the psychology of it. But one is Dave down the pub, right? So we're Irish, so that we bring things back to the pub quite a bit. But Dave down the pub, your buddy, who you know usually has his information pretty correct, but every now and again he'll say something outlandish, and he'll say 100% that's true, that's the fact, that happened, and everybody's like, okay, we'll go along with that, and then you might repeat that to somebody else, and eventually someone's going to get caught out in it, saying, no, that's absolutely nonsense, that's not true. I told my wife last Thursday we were watching a movie called The Trap, and Josh
Oh, I've
Hartnett's
heard
in it.
about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I'd recommend it.
Yeah.
But I said to I had in my head that he was Harrison Ford's son. So I said, it's amazing that he's Harrison Ford's son. He's done so well. And my wife said he is not Harrison Ford's son. And I said, hey, I'm 99% positive he is not. So every human being, their brain can jump to a conclusion. They put data together for some reason, they believe it's true. And that's very akin to what's happening with AI. But the second thing is some of the world's greatest minds are responsible for this technology. And we all grew up in a NASA age where NASA were the folks who landed on the moon, who accomplished amazing, unbelievable things. And when you hear about these experts creating these new technologies, you realize that yes, they're responsible for this even being possible, but at a certain point it goes out of their control. Just like a
Mm.
rocket can explode,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
people can get stuck on the ISS. Even though the people who created it were amazing, things can go wrong. And I think that's the
Yeah.
combination of why people trust it. They believe it's infallible.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I totally. I'm a bit of a I've become a bit of a history buff on that time in terms of technical acceleration that happened during World War II, or even World War One to World War Two.
Yeah.
What came out of that? It's just amazing. But yeah, it's actually really really funny. I thought when you were talking about the infallibility of it all, and we believe these things. I went back to George Costanza. Speaking of the '90s, one of George Costanza's famous quotes is, "It's not a lie if you believe it." So,
That's true.
so maybe somewhere down the track we can apply that to it. The George Costanza rule of AI.
Yeah,
That would be really interesting. All
it
right,
started here.
it started like absolutely. I've started a few things on this show, but I don't think as great as that. That's for sure. Let's talk about data and security around that data, because I think that's a big topic, right? So we've talked a little bit about how Calypso helps with coding, and from what I just understand at a purely basic level is you guys do a lot of the legwork to make sure that companies don't need to worry about the bad stuff happening, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So you kind of control that, and you've got your own playbooks and your own policies that help the companies not having to spend time and money and effort on that. All good. What about in the security space? What about in the data space here, and just the general security around AI and generative AI? How do you guys play into that?
Yeah. So there are kind of two high level categories in AI. There's folks who are building models, and there are folks who are using models. So inference is the usability of models. And there are very, very, very few, less than 10 companies actually building Gen AI models from the ground up. And so those folks are not our target, right? They have a really, really hard time, and they do amazing work, and they're responsible for all of this being possible. So those companies are doing a fantastic job, and they do their best at protecting the general use case. So it won't give you guidelines on how to commit a crime and get away with it or things like that, right? So they do a great job at, let's call it, the 80%. But
Yeah.
when you bring any of those into the inference space, where 99.9% of companies will use these things, they're very specific use cases. And those use cases have domain expertise required, the last mile, SMEs required to understand how to use the model in the best way with the right data. And so in there, you need to understand how data is used, what way it can be manipulated correctly or incorrectly, and then that loop, right? So you heard of the data poisoning and data coming back in to make the model better or fine tune a model. And if that data is corrupted or modified to cause the model to do things in different ways, or lean it in a certain direction, and create a bias, it can cause really, really big problems quickly when at scale. And so what we allow you to do is and put safeguards in place before and after your model usage in the inference space. And security right now is, and I think it's a really interesting question because security has to somehow put its arms around all of this.
Yeah.
And really, it's multiple activities as opposed to one big one. But at a macro view, it's putting the arms around the problem collectively.
Yeah, and that hallucinations and data leakage and model misuse is all part of that as well, isn't it? I mean, how do you fight Because from my perspective, hallucinations um, is relative to the type of model it is. Like a model that's got less parameters versus more parameters will hallucinate more, right? I think we've seen that if I've downloaded and used Alarma locally, and I remember version 2 model with the 7 billion parameter thing. If I asked that
Mhm.
a question about something, it would be just like it was completely made up. But then if you went to the 20 billion or 30 billion, it got better. But then as soon as 3 got released, then even the 7 billion was better than the 2 billion of the 30.
Yeah.
So that's just basically the way that it is, though, right? So as a company will naturally just use the latest model, things will get better, but you guys are still there to basically guide them in the way to make sure that even that sort of when they're using the better technology, the better model that they're trained on, they're still going to get the desired outcomes as they continue to evolve with that model.
Yeah, it's Tom and Jerry again, right? So once the new model comes out, we'll see new attack vectors. So I'll give you an example, right? We have a game we launched. It's called Behind the Mask. You've got to try unmask the hacker. And so we have, you know, a huge amount of people every day trying to win that game. And they try different techniques to fool our security. And so we use that to learn. We use that to grow and understand what, 0-day attacks people are trying, etc.
Interesting.
And one day there was 6 of us standing around someone's desk going, what the hell is this attack? And we're looking at this person hitting all these requests, and they're Fortnite, the game Fortnite.
Uh-huh.
They're using Fortnite terminology to speak with the model. And none of us are au fait with Fortnite terminology. So it looked like, Klingon to us. And we're looking at this, and it was breaking through the model and getting results it shouldn't get. And so we quickly, created a 0-day defense against that. And now the game is better and it doesn't allow that to happen. But what constitutes an attack in, let's say, Llama 2 versus Llama 3? There's a new encoder at the start of the model. How the model interprets English text or any other language text changes version to version. And these attackers sit there all day trying new techniques at scale, and they find ways to get through. So it is this Tom and Jerry effect all the time.
Yeah, those bastards, eh? Always trying to get ahead. But that's a really interesting sort of yeah, using Fortnite so the Fortnite terminology was what allowed them to trick their way through, basically. It's
Yeah, if you think
amazing.
about the good people in Meta creating safeguards, right, in their model,
Yeah.
and they're doing their damnedest, and they're top flight, top tier people,
Yes.
and they come home that night and they go to their partner or whatever saying somebody's using Fortnite terminology. Can you believe that? And they're like their partner's going, look, I don't really care why you telling me the story, but it is fascinating to those of us in the industry that it could be anything, any attack from any direction.
That's right. And they're so smart these days. I mean, they've always been smart. There's always been smart, cheeky people. There's also been people that want to see the world burn. Um,
Yeah,
but the common denominator is that they're tenacious and they just want to effectively either have fun or do it for a certain cause or a certain
yeah,
outcome. So, and if there's if anybody's getting any source of monetary benefit out of it, or even if it's just their own sort of inner sort of sense of achievement, they're going to do it, right. That's the whole basis of the whole cyber threat landscape today, whether it be in AI, whether it be in general IT as well. So it's a really good place for you guys to be able to help stop that as well. All right. Let's finish off, talk about the broader landscape of AI. So where do you see it generally today? We haven't got too much time left. So in a couple of minutes, where do you see this going? What's Calypso going to be dealing with in 18, 24 months in the AI workspace?
I sadly believe the money makes the world go round. So I use that as my major crystal ball. So if you look today, who's making money off this? It's Nvidia. Clearly, they're making huge profits, and rightly so. But then it's the power companies. You saw that report. The energy providers are making huge amounts of money because sadly, AI requires a lot of energy to run. And
Mm.
then if you think about those two as green bars above the line in terms of profitability, you've got then the major model creators, the foundational model creators in the red, right? Huge red, deep bar. That is all of this investment going in. And with, sadly with the economy, etc., that needs to be, there has to be an ROI. And one step beyond that is all of these applications, use cases that will use those models, and that will be bring that red up into the green and then accelerate into the future. The gap between that right now is enablement. So what do you need to take a model with all those risks and get some profit out of it? And that's things like security. So we see businesses like ourselves being the enabler for that. But then into the future, we're seeing a really interesting trend. As I said, everybody's moving to inference. You used to have to spend a bunch of money on data science and
Mm-hmm.
ML and
Yep.
GPUs. Now you can get it for pence on the dollar, access to the world's top models, or you can download open source. So we see there being a dual outcome. We see open source models being hosted internally for privacy reasons, etc. And the cost of GPU utilization coming down with Grok, with LPUs, etc. And then we also see a kind of a proliferation of these proprietary models like OpenAI and others, where the cost gets really, really low and it truly becomes ubiquitous technology, just like an SDK for everyone to use.
Yeah.
So when you see that, though, you have this huge advent of AI, and then something weird will happen. AI will disappear. Why will AI disappear? It will become fully normalized. No one speaks about, Java
Mm.
frameworks or JREs or runtimes anymore
Interesting.
because they're normalized. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's already kind of it's the first steps that are like Gemini going into all the Android phones. Apple's
Yeah.
about to announce that as well. We should be probably more scared of that, but we aren't. Again, that trust thing. Um, but yeah, it'll just be a new thing, right? It'll be a new thing. What's really interesting was what you said there about the power usage and the people in the green versus the red and whatnot. Um, the parallels of blockchain technology are so interesting in that sense as well. Like for a while there, we were so enamored with blockchain and where that was going. Still there. I still think it's got certain place and use case. I don't think it's dead. I think it'll have its day in the sun in some form again. But obviously
Yeah.
AI, it's funny AI doesn't get the same amount of what's the word um, focus on the greenery of it, or the non-greenery of the power consumption. The same freaking cards. It's the same reason my Nvidia was doing so well. It's because they were using the cards. Anything I tell my kids, anything that generates heat costs money.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can touch the lamp and it's hot, costs money. That's what I tell them. So turn it off.
Yeah.
um, all right. The last question is on Calypso, like AI. Where are you guys going? Like, where will you guys be? What's the next big thing for you guys in the next 12 to 18 months, or even sooner?
Yeah. So I guess for us, the biggest thing we are there for is to help security teams deal with this huge new problem. Not just in terms of the scale of the problem, but also there's a huge resource problem in InfoSec at the moment. These talented people can only do so much. And what you want to do is not try to replace what they do. You want to give them the tooling to allow them to do more with the expertise they have in their discipline and their domain. And so our current goal is to give those people the tools they need to work with. Secondary, we're going into red teaming. That's really, really interesting.
Okay.
We've identified 10 above categories of techniques to red team models. And we're using agentic, so using agents with models to do that. And then lastly, it's the GRC, so it's the regulation compliance side. Um, Everyone's looking at the EUA Act as if it's something that stifles innovation. In fact, my viewpoint is that if you know where the safeguards are, you can run as fast as you want because you know where not to fall over or trip over. So it's like signposts on the road versus something slowing you down. And when you build an application, the one thing you got to be sure of is that you're staying within the rules. And that's the last kind of part of our pie chart. We've defense already done, offense in progress, and then it becomes the regulation side.
Awesome, great stuff. I love all that. I think it's very well rounded. Lots of areas of the business which lots of companies will tap into because it is so important. And as it becomes more mainstream, the regulation I think is something that's going to be huge. But it's a really interesting company. I'm glad we had this is a great conversation. I really am interested in what you guys are doing. I think people have gotten a really good, different outlook as to the generative AI world and what you guys do in it. So, Jimmy, thanks for being on episode 90 of Great Things with Great Tech.
Thanks so much, Anthony. My pleasure.
Hey, just as a reminder, thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to highlight companies and technologies shaping our world. Don't forget to follow us on social media at G2WGT Podcast and visit g2wgt.com for more great content and all past episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Please spread the word, and if you feel like it, drop a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Great Things with Great Tech.